Thank you so much, Prabhu. I really appreciate you being here, giving me some time to share your memories and your experiences over the years. So would you be willing to start off just by sharing a little bit about how you met devotees and how you got inspired to join?
Well, I grew up in New York City, and when I started going to college, I was a hippie and I moved down to the East Village. And I didn't live very far from 26 Second Avenue.
Okay.
I moved there. I was going to the village in 65 and 66, but I made the move, myself and a couple of friends, and we got an apartment in what is called Alphabet City. That's Avenue A, B, C, D. And so we were down there in the East Village starting 67 and 68. And a friend of mine in college, she said that, there's a new yoga group that opened up in near you. Can you go there and get me some information? So I didn't go there for myself. I
Wow.
went to 26 Second Avenue for a friend of mine. And so I got some of those mimeographed Back to Godhead magazines. And excuse me.
No problem.
And I brought the magazines to her. And I don't know if she did anything with them. But a year later in college, I was majoring in filmmaking. I took dual courses in college for theater and filmmaking. And so I thought when I had my filmmaking courses, I was supposed to do a little documentary on something. And I thought, well, these Hare Krishna people, they look pretty photogenic. Let me go down and make a little, it's only going to be 5 or 10 minutes or 15 minutes. But I did the footage. I made some footage. Actually, my wife and I met in college, and she was majoring in sociology. So she said, let me come with you, and I'll do a paper for my sociology class about the Hare Krishnas. So we were both going to the temple. We weren't married at the time. We lived together for 3 years before we actually got married.
Yeah.
And so when we graduated, we left New York and moved up to Nova Scotia. We
Okay.
wanted to get pretty far away from New York City. We took a Bhagavad Gita with us, and we were reading Prabhupada's this short blue one. I still have a copy.
Yeah, I've seen that one.
This is the one, the
Wow.
Bhagavad Gita, and it's an abridged version that came out, I think, in 69. Allen Ginsberg has a really nice introduction there,
Yes.
along with Thomas Merton. And so we were reading the Bhagavad Gita up in Nova Scotia. And a year later, we spent about a year, 8 months, I would say, up in Nova Scotia. And then in 60, no, this was in 71 already. We went up to Nova Scotia in 1970 after we graduated. And then in 71, three things happened in very close proximity. One is we went to a hobby shop and bought beads. In those days, you really couldn't buy beads. We went to a hobby shop and we made beads and started chanting.
Wow.
And also, we got married. And a month later, we met Srila Prabhupada. That was in Detroit in 1971. So
Wow.
that was a crucial, pivotal part of our lives. That those 2 months in 1971, like I said, where we started chanting, got married, and actually met Srila Prabhupada. And so we've been, both of us, we were kind of stubborn. I was not a joiner. I never liked to join anything. Even when I was younger, and my friends encouraged me to join the Boy Scouts. I was really diametrically opposed to joining any type of organization. And so I've been, following the Krishna devotees for a couple of years now. And we after we left Nova Scotia, we went to Madison. We took up residence in Madison. I was invited to join a theater company in Madison. That was after we left Detroit and saw Srila Prabhupada. We continued to Madison, Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And at that time, we were there for about 2.5 years. And so we've been tracking the devotees and incorporating elements. We stopped, taking marijuana and other things. And so we were gradually incorporating these Krishna consciousness elements into our own life.
Yes.
And finally, in 1973, we made the decision to join the Chicago Temple.
Wow.
And we went at an auspicious time. We joined right just a week or so before the deities at the Chicago Temple were installed. And we were there for the installation of Kishore Kishori. We spent a couple of years in Chicago. I was distributing books at O'Hare Airport.
Okay.
But my real preference in distributing, at the O'Hare Airport, the devotees would go and distribute books to a more of a well-to-do clientele. But I really enjoyed going downtown Chicago with a big bag of Back to Godhead magazines.
Mm.
I would take a whole box with me. And so that's like 100 Back to Godhead magazines. This was much more relishable for me to meet the average people, the people that usually wouldn't think of buying a book,
Yeah.
but they can afford a quarter or 50 cents
Yeah.
for a Back to Godhead. And I kind of liked talking with people, and I made a point that every time I went to downtown Chicago with a box of books, I would distribute all of them before I left. So I would do 100 books
Wow.
and excuse me, not books, but Back to
Yeah,
Godhead,
magazines. Yeah, Back to Godhead magazine.
100 magazines at a time.
Wow. So you came when they were already in Rogers Park in Chicago, or they were still in Evanston?
Yes, they were in Evanston.
Okay.
This is the old YMCA building in Evanston,
Okay.
and I left before they moved.
Okay, got
My
it.
wife and I we came to New Vrindaban in 1976. We
Wow.
moved here,
Okay.
and I visited New Vrindaban earlier in 1972. There was something that really appealing uh, about New Vrindaban. And in 1972, I came for the Janmashtami festival. And that was the year Srila Prabhupada, he only visited New Vrindaban 4 times. In 1970, the first time in 1969 for a month. He came up to the original Vrindavan farm, the 130 acres of land
Yes.
that Hayagriva and Kirtananda purchased in 1968. And so Prabhupada came in 1969 for 1 month and kind of he wanted to make sure things were moving along properly and establish the principles of
Yeah.
New Vrindavan, simple living, high thinking, taking care of the cows, and becoming self-sufficient. And he also mentioned establishing 7 temples at that time, even though they only had 130 acres. Prabhupada wanted to have 7 temples established as soon as possible.
Wow.
We're still working on that.
Wow. So then in 76, what was it that attracted you and your wife to move to New Vrindavan?
Well, the thing was we had two children
Okay.
and they were growing up rapidly. Our son was 4 and our daughter was 2. And we weren't inclined to send away our kids to
Yeah.
at 5 years old. That really, I didn't particularly care for that idea.
Yeah.
So we moved to New Vrindavan because they had a school. So
Okay.
we wanted to be close to our kids. They went to school when they reached age, and the Gurukula. But we kept an eye on them. We wanted to make sure things were going well for them. Eventually, our son went to the international boarding school in Vrindaban, India,
Okay.
and that was in I think 1980 or 81.
Okay. What was it like in 76 when you first came? Were a lot of devotees there already by that time?
Well, the whole focus was building the palace,
Hmm.
Prabhupada's palace. And at that time, it was kind of controversial because a lot of the devotees around the movement were saying, what are you building this building in the middle of nowhere for? Prabhupada's main mission that he wants us to do is to distribute books. Get the books out. You guys are not doing that. You guys are wasting your time building this palace. But actually, Prabhupada saw the palace was under construction in 74 when he came, and it was much more under construction in 76 when he arrived. And he really appreciated what was going on in New Vrindavan. And he appreciated that the palace was being built. And he promised the devotees in New Vrindavan that when the palace is built, I'll spend half of the year at New Vrindavan and the other half of the year traveling.
Wow.
So this is the promise that he made to the residents of New Vrindavan. Unfortunately, Prabhupada passed away in 1977, and the palace was actually finished a couple of years later in 1979. And when
Wow.
we had the grand opening for the palace, it was a 3-day major festival where thousands of devotees came from around the country. It was a bigger, actually, when I came in 1972 for the Janmashtami festival, that Prabhupada was also present. Close to 1,000 devotees came. It was in 1972, that Janmashtami festival was the biggest festival that ISKCON had up to that time.
Wow.
And even the New York Times, a reporter came and he did a really pretty decent article about New Vrindavan. And so now in 1979, when the palace opened, we were flooded with reporters, and there was so much news about the opening of the palace. And where we felt that, yes, Prabhupada has moved into the palace. The
Yeah.
devotees have a strong, strong feeling that lives there that, yes, Prabhupada is established in his palace of gold.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't realize the construction had started so early on, already by
Yeah, I think it
74.
started in 73, 74.
Wow.
So in the latter years, that was the main focus. 76 and 77, they were hoping to get it finished, but Prabhupada passed away, and then it finally finished in the grand opening was on Labor Day weekend of 1979. And I take pride. I was one of the first tour guides at the
I,
Palace of Gold.
I was going to
And
ask you about that.
actually, I was giving tours even before the palace was opened. I
Oh,
went up to the site sometimes, and there were like 50 or 60 devotees working at the site at any one time during the last 4 or 5 months. I wasn't much of a tool guy. I couldn't really bang a hammer, bang a nail into a piece of wood. But I went up there, and very often people were coming, and I started giving tours and showing people around even
Wow.
before the palace was opened.
Wow. It was drawing a crowd even before it was officially opened.
A lot of locals, yeah, were
Wow.
coming, taking a look. But then Kirtananda, he very skillfully, about a month before it was scheduled to open, he said, "Okay, no more tours. If people come now, we're not going to accommodate them. We're going to turn them away. They can come back when the palace is officially opened."
Got it. And you continued as a tour guide after that point for some time. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, that was the opening was in 70, like I said, in Labor Day weekend of 79. I started giving tours. There's a couple of other prominent devotees that were giving tours at the Palace of Gold. But then at the end of the year, I joined the Vaikuntha Players in New York City. My background was in theater. I wanted to establish a theater program in New Vrindaban. And so I went and joined the Players. That was Lokamangala and Nandakishore. These guys were some of the original Vaikuntha Players. Not there at the time, also that I befriended later on, was Lohitaksha and his wife Rasagya. So all of these devotees were very inspiring to me. I took away a lot of, even though I studied theater in college, I took away a lot more uh, 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 from theater, working with these devotees. And I spent 5 or 6 months in New York performing the Ramayana. Hang on for a sec. This is the original poster of the Ramayana
Wow.
in New York City at the time. So this actually was the last days of the Vaikuntha Players. After that, they sold the New York Temple on 55th Street, the building that Prabhupada told them never to
Yes.
sell.
Yes.
They couldn't handle it. They sold it. There was a lot of difficulty with the elevators,
I see.
and I guess there was a lot of frustration. The devotees really didn't know how to manage a building of that sort.
Yeah.
But there was one fella who came, a theater a guy. He reviewed the Ramayana at that time, and Lokamangala and Nandakishore and myself showed him around the temple. And in the basement, there was a vegetarian restaurant. On
Yes.
the ground floor, there was a temple and also a gift shop. And on the third floor, there was a 100-seat theater where we performed and invited the public to see our plays. And so the reviewer, he said to us, "You guys are sitting on a gold mine."
Wow.
So somebody stepping off from the streets of New York City could see, but the devotees, they were still in like I think a couple of devotees that Lakshmi Nrsimha, he was the temple president, but there were a couple of other devotees that were from the bus party. And so they had a totally different mindset.
Yeah.
They couldn't deal with a building. And so after they sold the building, the theater project in New York fell apart. The core of preaching in New York fell apart. They got another little center in New York City, but eventually they moved to Brooklyn, where they are now.
Got it.
But that was a big setback, selling that building, and that broke broke up the theater, the focus on the Vaikuntha players in New York.
They had started when Srila Prabhupada was still on the planet, correct? They had.
Oh yes, Prabhupada visited that building.
No, what I mean,
And
the Vaikuntha players, they had formed up. They were doing plays, I think, even in Mayapur. Is that right? They were doing shows.
yes, in Mayapur, in New York, and also in California.
Wow.
So Lokamangala was, I don't know if you've seen his work. If you've seen the Ramayana, the video that ITV put out, he plays Ravana.
Okay, got it.
I don't know if you've seen that.
I can't recall. I'll look
Ramayana.
it up. I'll look it up.
It was actually filmed in New Vrindaban after the New York temple broke down, closed down. Then the players scattered, but they regrouped at the request of Sringananda of ITV, ISKCON Television, and we spent 2 months filming the Ramayana here in New Vrindavan.
Okay.
And so Lokamangala, he told me once that Prabhupada wanted the Vaikuntha players to come to India. And so, none of them had the money at the time. They'd have to go out and really scramble how to make the money. Prabhupada said, I'm going to pay for it. So that's how much Prabhupada appreciated the theater. Wow. And the importance of drama. And so after the New York temple closed down in 1980, then Lokamangala and I continued to work together. And for the next 10 years, from up until 1990, he spent most of his time here in New Vrindavan. And then in 1987, we heard that Peter Brook, who was an international theater director from England, but he put together an international cast and he prepared a 9-hour drama of Mahabharata, wow, which he toured all over the world. I don't know if you've heard of the name Peter Brook. He's very famous in theater circles. So he came to New York in the fall of 1987. And so I was thinking that Lokamangala and I have had some scenes of the Ramayana under our belt already, but let's get together a theater performance and rent a theater in New York City the same time Peter Brook would be there with his international cast, Mahabharata, 9-hour drama that was performed at the Brooklyn Academy of Music for 3 months. Of course, we raised some money, but we couldn't raise enough to cover our expenses for 3 months. We got a theater in New York City in Midtown Manhattan, which cost us $1,000 a week, and we were there for 5 or 6 weeks. Wow. But the thing is, as we were developing the piece in the early part of 1987, we were thinking of other devotees joining us. But the thing is, it was such a big commitment that we were in rehearsal for 3 months. And then we were raising funds to rent a theater. And then we finally went to New York City and we were going to perform there and maybe take it on tour. After our 6 weeks were over in New York, we were thinking of continuing with it and going on tour to colleges and different centers. Yes. No one wanted to make that type of a commitment. Yes. So Lokamangala and I performed a 2-man Mahabharata, just the two of us. I played 3 roles. He played 6 roles. We had 12 different scenes. And besides being the actors, we also assumed the role of the storytellers. During each scene, we continued and sharing the kind of the transitional information that took us into the next scene. and we had minimal costume changes. Maybe a sash or a wig or something very minimal
Yes.
that we could change into. And so the New York Times even came and did a review, and they referred to us as the other Mahabharata.
Oh, wow.
There was Peter Brooks Mahabharata. Everybody knew it.
Yeah, yeah.
Everybody in
I
town
see
knew
the other
about
one.
that.
Yeah, got it.
We were the other Mahabharata. And in the article, it mentions that these devotees, there was myself and Lokamangala, we were the two actors. We also had another devotee, Mahesh, and he provided on-stage musical accompaniment. He
Okay.
was off to the side, and this is done in traditional Indian theater, where there's the musicians, and he had a tempura, and he played the bansuri flutes. He played numerous flutes. He played the tablas. He had a kind of a whole
Wow.
selection of musical instruments that he was surrounded by, and also one other devotee, Deva, who's a Bharatanatyam dancer, and I'm still in touch with him. He came and he did two Bharatanatyam sessions, an invocation, and he also came out when we did the Bhagavad Gita scene, and he was performing around us at that time as well.
Wow.
So it was the four of us, and the New York Times mentioned that we were disciples of Srila Prabhupada, that we were Hare Krishna devotees. And so after the Times came out, one fella showed up. He was a Jewish gentleman, and he'd been studying Prabhupada's books. And he said after the play, our policy was we would go out to the lobby after the play was over and thank people for coming to the play.
Yeah.
And we also had some books out there if people wanted to get a book. And so this Jewish gentleman, his name is Yitzhak Buxbaum. He was an author and a storyteller. And so he said, when I read in the New York Times that you were disciples of Srila Prabhupada, he said, I knew that this is the real Mahabharata and Peter Brooks is the shadow Mahabharata.
Wow.
That was his realization.
That's special.
And so we were getting a lot of good coverage. And after our run there, we continued. We were invited to Philadelphia to perform, and we were invited to different colleges. Eventually, a couple of years later, we were invited back to New York and performed for Sri Chinmoy. I don't know if you're familiar with Sri Chinmoy.
I've heard of
He
yes.
he invited us to come, and he has a community in Queens, in New York.
Okay.
About 400 his disciples and himself came to see our Mahabharata, and afterwards he jumped up on stage and he began to glorify Prabhupada.
Chai.
He said that Prabhupada, he is all of our guru. He's the guru for all of us. And even Swami Rama at the Himalayan Institute in Pennsylvania, they heard about our production, and they were having a huge festival at the Himalayan Institute. And actually, that was the last performance we did together. After that, it was dissipated. Lokamangala moved out to California, but I continued performing, doing a solo rendition of Mahabharata as a storyteller.
Yes.
And just in the early 90s, I was transitioning from theater to storytelling. I had found out about a national storytelling movement in New York City, and people were actually the storytellers were actually going to schools and colleges and getting paid to do storytelling sessions.
Wow.
And so in the early 90s, the movement was transitioning. I also knew Vrindavan was transitioning, and people had to start finding out ways of generating their own income. Before that, it was a commune. And so I used my theatrical skills and developed a repertoire of storytelling. And I did programs in the elementary schools. That I went there as a professional storyteller in the elementary schools. And I told stories from around the world. But in colleges, when I was invited to colleges, there I maintained my presence as a devotee
Got it.
and talked about the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, and I did dramatic stories from those literatures and from the Srimad Bhagavatam. And sometimes I spent a day or two on campus, not only performing, but then going around to different classes and talking about my background. So
Got it.
that was kind of full-fledged preaching that I was doing. I was going to colleges. I was also going to interfaith um, presentations. I was invited in 1993. They had the centennial anniversary of the World Parliament of Religion. So the
Okay.
World Parliament of Religions, the the historic session was in 1893 in Chicago. That's the one that Vivekananda came to.
Yes.
And so 1993, they had a centennial celebration, and they were looking for people to offer presentations. And I found out pretty early on, and I offered my programs. I did a few programs there, some workshops, and also a performance. And so that was in 1993. And throughout the 90s, there was a lot of New Age things were happening and interfaith gatherings and dialogues. And so I tried to kind of develop a repertoire of sacred storytelling. One thing that I did is just put together a one performance of sacred stories from around the world, which I called Sacred Voices.
Hmm.
So I was pretty active in the college scene and in the interfaith dialogue and the New Age scene in the 1990s. In those years and in subsequent years, I was putting almost 2,000 miles a month on my car.
Wow.
So I was, doing a lot of traveling. So that's a little bit about that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. I didn't realize you had done all of that, those college programs. That's really nice.
Not only did I go out to colleges, but very often I encouraged college classes to come and visit New Vrindavan for a few hours or a day or two.
Yeah, nice. Do you know anything about how the Vaikuntha players first formed? How was that Lokamangala Prabhu? He had kind of gotten the group together in the
I
beginning?
think, well, there was devotees even before Lokamangala, of course. I think Rasagya and Lohitaksha, husband and wife, they passed away. Lokamangala passed away. Nanda Kishore passed away. There was Sudama Maharaj was one of the early organizers of that. Theater takes a heavy toll. Most of the theater people that I know have from those days have passed away.
Yeah.
And talking about a heavy toll, in 1994, I had a massive heart attack, and I almost passed away at that time myself.
94.
Yeah.
Oh my. Wow.
So, what else did you want to talk about beside the theater, or I
Yeah.
don't know, yeah, what other thoughts or
Yeah.
questions or
I
concerns you
guess
have?
so. You were um, maybe jumping back to the 80s. You'd mentioned that Kirtananda Maharaj with New Vrindavan was kind of supporting the theater to some
Yes.
degree. So what did that look like? Was that like part of you had a department and you were on a budget and he was supporting the preaching. He appreciated what you were doing?
Yeah, we Lokamangala came to New Vrindavan, and there was a number of interested devotees in New Vrindavan as well. We got together plays for the summer visitors, and we also toured to colleges and Hindu temples, etc., throughout the 1980s. So I was pretty much I when I got to New Vrindavan, I was cooking the breakfast. You know, there's the famous breakfast, oat water and rice.
Yes.
I was cooking that for over 10 years
Wow.
when I was in New Vrindavan, the oat water and the rice. I started cooking on a what is called the pits. That's down in the second farm that opened. The original farm is called the Old Vrindavan Farm.
Okay.
And a few years later, in 1971, they purchased more property, but this property was right on the road. The original property, you couldn't really drive there. You would have to walk 2 miles into the woods on a dirt path going up to the original 130-acre farm. But then they bought in 1972 an old farmhouse, and they converted that into a temple. And
Was that Bahulaban?
Bahulaban, exactly.
Got it.
And then in a year or so later, a couple of years later, they purchased another piece of property that they named as Madhuban.
Okay.
And that's where I live now, in Madhuban. And
Got it.
when I first came to New Vrindavan, my wife and we arrived in New Vrindavan in the midst of a epidemic, a typh I think it was typhoid. I can't remember now. The community was shut down
Wow.
this is in 1976. The community, you couldn't get in. There were police cars on the main road where preventing any devotees from leaving or anybody coming into the New Vrindavan community. And that's the time my wife and I moved in to New Vrindavan, is during the this epidemic that lasted for about a month or so in New Vrindavan. But there's an old backcountry dirt road that people rarely used.
Got
And
it.
so in the dead of night, we drove into New Vrindavan on this old obscure road, an old dirt road, and arrived in New Vrindavan on the eve of Gurpurnim.
Wow.
So we came on, which was in early March, and in those days the winters were very severe, and we arrived from Chicago Temple. We arrived on the eve of Gurpurnim, and so we heard that whatever you do to commemorate Lord Chaitanya's appearance will fructify in success.
Mm.
So we knew that we needed any blessings that we could get from anywhere. We knew that New Vrindavan, we heard the reports, New Vrindavan was a severe place, a very austere place to live.
Yeah.
And so we arrived in New Vrindavan, but at least we were thinking that we'd be there, we'd be fasting all day for Gurpurnim, but we'd wind up with a huge feast at the end of the day.
Yes.
But New Vrindavan had consulted a Ayurvedic physician, and they were wondering, what do we need to do to get rid of this disease once and for all? And he told them, go on a fast for 7 days.
Oh, Krishna.
And the only thing you can eat is you cook the mung beans, and you don't make the mung dal. You just cook the mung beans, and you strain out the water, and you drink the water a couple of times a day for 7 days. that what was happening in New Vrindavan.
Wow.
When that was just inaugurated like the day we got there. So we didn't realize, but we had a fast, practically speaking, just on living on mung water for 7 days. And they moved us into, like I said, this area that I live in, this house is called, this part of New Vrindavan is called Madhuban. And back in 76, across the street from us, there were these 5 little adobe huts that were in the woods. Across the street from us, there's a huge field.
Yes.
And in the woods, they built 5 little adobe huts. No electricity, no running water. And so when we arrived here, we moved into one of those adobe huts, and we lived there with two young children for about 3 or 4 months, March, April, May. I think by the summertime, we moved down to Vrindaban. And so we lived in very austere conditions
Wow.
for 3 or 4 months before we moved down to what is called the civilized part of New Vrindavan, down in Vrindaban.
Wow. That was there was a Jagannath temple in Madhuban.
Yes, yes, that temple. Unfortunately, you see, in 19 that was a little old farmhouse,
Okay.
and in 1972, when Prabhupada visited here, he stayed in that house.
Okay.
And I took darshan of Prabhupada in that house, just myself and a small group of devotees. I was just a visitor at that time. And so in 1972, I was invited to come up to that house to help straighten up. You know, in those days, when Prabhupada was coming to a temple, there was a frenzy of activity for several hours before Prabhupada arrived.
Yes.
And so the same thing was happening in this little house, this old farmhouse. It didn't have a proper bathroom. They didn't want Prabhupada to go out in the woods. So they built a shower stall outside the house, onto the house. And so they asked me to go down to a pine forest and get a few bags of pine needles and spread them around, because there's the door at one end of the house, and at the other end of the house there was the shower stall on the outside. So they asked me to create a little walkway with
Okay.
the pine needles to the shower stall. And so I was doing that. And then finally, Prabhupada showed up, and there was a bunch of sannyasis with him. They got out of the car, they went inside the house, and myself and 1 or 2 other people, we were hovering outside the door, and Prabhupada was speaking inside. His little table was just inside the doorway, and there was like a dozen sannyasis and senior people in the room with him.
Yes.
So, and this is a really important thing, because nobody invited us in. Who invited us in?
Srila
Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada, his mood was to be inclusive. He didn't want to exclude anybody, and he invited us in. And we wound up sitting right, like in the first row, right in front of Prabhupada. And at that time, and I always tell people this, because, you know, Prabhupada, he named this place New Vrindavan, but he was also talking about New Vrindavan at that time when he invited us in. And he was saying that New Vrindavan is none different than Vrindavan in India. And anyone who visits New Vrindavan gets the same blessings, the same spiritual energy of going all the way to Vrindavan. You can get that here in New Vrindavan.
Jai.
So I remember him very distinctly saying that. So that's one thing that I always mention to visitors. But
Wow.
the thing is that the last time Prabhupada visited here in 1976, he stayed in the house that I'm living in now.
Wow.
Gave darshan right out on the front lawn every evening for like he was here for 9 or 10 days. I was living here at the time. Let me hang on for a second. I think I have a picture. This is a very famous picture. People will recognize this, but this is taken on the front lawn of the house.
Got it. Wow.
Those are pretty popular. This is a group of devotees with Prabhupada taking darshan. And that's so there was one devotee, Dulal Chandra, who used to live here. He took a series of pictures that became very popular of Prabhupada out on the front lawn over here. And the way it was arranged is that there were like 200 or more devotees living in New Vrindavan and probably another 100 visitors. And so every night, everybody was assigned at least one night where they can go and get darshan of Prabhupada right here on the front lawn. So the groups, were very small. There was 30 people for darshan. And it was a great strategy. Rather than having huge crowds,
Yes.
it was a small, intimate group, and you really got a chance to hear Prabhupada, and devotees had opportunity to ask Prabhupada specific questions.
Wow.
So I'm fortunate enough now over the years, I've been living here for over 25 years. I'm very fortunate to have this house.
Wow. So in the 80s, there was a lot of turbulence in the movement, and at one point, New Vrindavan was banned. Like Kirtananda Maharaj was banned, and then New Vrindavan was considered out of ISKCON. What was that like for you personally? Was it a difficult time? Was it a confusing time, or
Well, it was like a roller coaster ride. It was Kirtananda, after Prabhupada passed away, he was actually in the movement. He was considered a senior personality. Devotees all over the world respected Kirtananda as a senior Prabhupada man. And Prabhupada, when he was here on his visits, he really appreciated what was going on here in New Vrindavan and the way Kirtananda was managing and developing the whole project.
yeah,
And Prabhupada would talk about New Vrindavan wherever he traveled all over the world. And so, devotees here understood, Prabhupada said this, that the devotees have perfected their lives here in New Vrindavan. And he said, just continue to follow Kirtananda.
got it.
And so throughout the 1980s, Kirtananda gradually made more and more and more changes
Yeah,
here in Vrindavan. And so, in one sense, it was like an experiment. We were willing to let him take a shot. But at a certain point, it was too much.
yeah,
And New Vrindavan broke down into two fractions. One that totally, saw Kirtananda as the pure devotee directing the New Vrindavan, and other devotees were a little bit hesitant and suspicious.
I see.
One of the points where I wanted him to succeed, and but when he pronounced himself as the founder Acharya of New Vrindavan,
I see.
I thought, well, wait a minute, this has gone too far.
Yeah,
And I was never really critical. I was trying to support him as much as possible, but over a period of a year or two, I did write him 6 letters over a period of a year, I think, making suggestions.
yeah,
Because at that time, one of the big problems was devotees would go out and do what is called scam kirtan. I don't know if you've heard that phrase.
Yes, yes, yes.
They were just going out and raising money whatever way they could, selling buttons or flowers or trinkets or paintings. Um, but I was saying, well, that's not what Prabhupada wanted. He wanted the devotees to go out and distribute the books and raise money on the books. And I didn't think that this would be a good way to, on one hand, we want the eyes of the world, we want the attention of the world on us,
Yeah,
but then behave in a way we're thinking that nobody's looking.
yeah, yeah,
So we want the attention of the world, but at the same time we're doing stupid things.
yeah.
And I attribute it to a lot of the senior devotees, myself included, actually. Although I'm not a senior devotee, but a lot of the senior devotees came out of the hippie movement.
I see.
This is back in the 60s and the early 70s. Most of the people joining dropped out of college, dropped out of the hippie movement, and joined the Hare Krishna movement.
Yes,
And so, they were already like a fringe. There was already that fringe element
got it.
there that Prabhupada had to work with. And, Prabhupada told him, don't do anything that would embarrass me or the Hare Krishna movement. So in one sense, we're still dealing with stuff today, even that, we don't want to do anything that would embarrass the movement.
Yeah,
That means be really careful and really on the up and up,
yeah,
and this goes all over the world, whether you're in the West or in the East. We have to be careful about Prabhupada's legacy.
yeah,
What type of he established a legacy, and we have to protect that legacy, even though it may depend that, okay, one or two or three devotees have to be kicked out. We need to protect the legacy. And getting back to the 80s, Kirtananda was kicked out of the movement.
yeah,
Um, and so the devotees here were willing to still hang in there. But, like I said, gradually more and more, there were more changes. And then, you have to eventually say enough is enough. And so there were a couple of people that approached myself and my wife. These people were Prabhupada disciples, but there were an element of Prabhupada disciples that were really totally sold out to Kirtananda. And so they came up and said, what, this is Kirtananda's community. Why don't you just try to follow it as, according to Kirtananda's wishes? And we were saying, no, this is Prabhupada's community.
yeah,
Kirtananda's taking care of it for Prabhupada,
yeah,
but it's not Kirtananda's movement, community. Prabhupada established this, and all of the people that came to join here in Vrindaban did so because they wanted to see Prabhupada's vision fulfilled of establishing New Vrindavan as a place of pilgrimage in the West.
yeah,
And that's what we wanted to do. And I'm a pretty, kind of, what is the word? Stubborn type of person, so I'm not going to give way. I
yeah,
I tried it. I tried to follow Kirtananda, sure. But, there's some point where you have to, and then Kirtananda, he had some lot of legal problems, and practically all of the money that was being raised by the Sankirtan devotees here were going to Kirtananda's legal problems.
I see.
And by the early 1990s, there wasn't much, we were, in a sense, we couldn't be a commune anymore.
Yeah,
Even Kirtananda told the devotees that they have to find their own sources of livelihood.
I
New
see.
Vrindavan can't support them anymore.
I
And
see.
at one time, New Vrindavan actually, you know, they were giving a stipend to the families. They were there was free dental facilities. They established a rapport with one dentist in the area, and they would pay him some minimal amount. They would pay the hospital a minimal amount when the devotees came there. The hospital was getting really frustrated
I see.
with, so there was some money going to the dentist, going to the hospital, getting a stipend of a minimal stipend. That was there, but then Kirtananda said, he was devouring all the money because of his
Yeah,
legal expenses. So he said, I can't, New Vrindavan it can be a commune anymore. You have to maintain yourselves.
got it.
And so I, in the early 90s, I began doing, like I said, multicultural storytelling programs in the schools, and that I had a kind of a career for 25 years. And I was part of the National Storytelling Network here in the United States. I was a member of the National Storytelling Network. I'm still a member of the West Virginia Storytelling Guild. And so one way, Prabhupada says, in like a needle.
Yes,
So one way is you meet people who have the same interests.
yes,
So everybody in the guild knows where I live. Some people have actually come out, and some of the storytellers in West Virginia have given tours to people here at the storytellers to given tours of New Vrindavan, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one way, if you have some common interests with the public in general,
yes,
one way to connect with people and gradually present Krishna consciousness. And in an early letter to the devotees here, Prabhupada told them to make the entire state of West Virginia Krishna conscious.
Mm. Wow. Did Kirtananda Swami ever write back to any of those letters? Did he give you any much of a reply or not so much?
Well, thank you for asking, because he never did.
Yeah,
He never responded. And a couple of people, devotees, were encouraging my wife and I to visit Kirtananda and talk with him privately. But later on, when the axe fell on Kirtananda, and it was found out that he had done activities that a sannyasi shouldn't do,
yeah.
he he asked my wife and I to come visit him personally, and he was profusely sorry, actually. And
He apologized to you personally.
yeah,
Mm.
I
Wow.
think he was going around. He didn't make a public apology, but he did have devotees personally visit him, and he made an apology to my wife and I. In those days, actually, Kirtananda looked pretty grim. He had a beard, a disheveled beard, and a bandana around his head, and long hair.
I see.
And I remember at some meeting, Radnath was visiting here in New Vrindavan, and I saw how distraught Radnath looked. He was overwhelmed with sadness,
Yeah,
seeing Kirtananda in this situation with long hair and disheveled. So you know, you want to give somebody a chance, but like I said, there's ultimately a time where you have to say, okay, this is it.
yeah. So that was in the early 90s. He was apologizing after kind of it came out and it was clear that he had lost the trust of the
Right.
devotees.
And he was in jail for some time, but Alan Dershowitz, he was a famous New England lawyer, Alan Dershowitz. He had Kirtananda had retained him. Somehow or other, he got out of jail, but then on technicalities, but then the government decided to retry him.
Yeah.
And if he had a plea bargaining, then he would have gotten a lesser sentence if he was found guilty. And myself and a number of other devotees were saying, take the plea bargaining, take the plea bargaining.
I see.
But he didn't take, he was pretty arrogant. He didn't take the plea bargaining, and he got sentenced to 8 years in jail, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
And after that, he never came back to New Vrindavan. He went to India.
got it.
And that's where he passed away, in India.
Yeah.
Krishna's funny in a way, because for years, it was like known amongst the devotees that Kirtananda didn't like the Hindus. He, in a sense, he tolerated the Hindus because they were great donors. But, in those days, there was not many people being initiated from the Hindu community in the 1980s. And so Kirtananda, he wanted like staunch followers, and the Hindu community wasn't providing.
Yes.
And so he didn't like the Hindu community so much for that reason. But Krishna is funny because he wound up in India amongst the Hindus.
Yes.
So Krishna, he has a great sense of humor.
Yeah. He'll teach us what we need to learn somehow or other.
Definitely.
Well, Prabhu, I don't want to take.
I think
Yeah, go ahead.
one last thing. Let me see. I have something around here. Because if people want to get in touch with me, this is my website. Is
Got it.
that clear?
Yes, Mahabharat Project.
Mahabharatproject.com. If you'd like to get in touch with me, if you'd like to see what I'm doing and articles that I'm writing, I've written 3 books. I'm working on a couple of other books right now. And I'm also have done a lot of articles for both Dandavats and ISKCON News. My most recent article is about one of Bob Dylan's songs. I don't know if you've had a chance to see that. I try to take a perspective that normally other devotees might not take. I'm looking for an interesting perspective. And I haven't done theater for 25 years or more, but I still have that theater consciousness within me.
Yeah.
And that theater consciousness is how to create a little drama.
Yeah.
Where is the element of drama? Because people are attracted to drama. And so you want to give an element of drama, an element of entertaining, but at the same time, you want to slip in the Krishna consciousness understanding as well, in the midst of the element of entertainment and drama. That's been my focus for years, whether it's been in drama and storytelling, and now in the last 10 years, mostly I'm doing more writing. I've written 3 books, like I said, and numerous articles, and I'm working on 2 other books.
I really loved your Mahabharat. I thought it was very wonderfully done. I really liked it.
Where did you get a copy?
I must have gotten one in New Vrindavan when I was
okay.
there. I think, yeah, I remember getting one and reading it.
This is it right here.
Yes. Yeah.
Actually, my daughter, she's a great artist. She designed the cover and the back cover. She's a
Wow.
One of the things about my book is because people were telling me while Lokamangala and I were performing together, they said, this is great. You should make it into a video or something. We never had a chance to do that.
Yes.
But I thought, let me write the Mahabharat as if it were something visual. That's the kind of the clue of being a storyteller.
Yes.
To present the visual element, but in a very succinct and clear way.
Yeah.
Some writers go on and on describing the visual things, but the trick of the storyteller is you include the audience. You're only giving a brief indication of the visual, and the rest of that visual manifests itself in the mind of the audience. So that's the nature, the work of the storyteller. How to give a little brief tidbits of information where a listener
Yeah.
creates a story.
Yes.
And I do a lot of coaching. Well, I used to do storytelling for theater people, for writers. That's another aspect of my work is coaching and helping people along in their particular fields.
Nice.
And so I hope everything is going well for you. And if you do plan to come back to the States sometime, don't hesitate to visit
Yeah,
here
we'd
in New
love to.
Vrindaban,
We'd
give
love
you
to
a
come.
personal tour. You have any final thoughts or questions?
Well, what are you working on now, if I can ask?
Well, it's kind of, I don't let information out too much, but I can say it's about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu.
Nice.
It's about Chaitanya. And
Okay.
in the news, I'm always looking for articles that I can make a Krishna conscious commentary.
Got it.
Because you see, this is really important. Because if we want people to consider Krishna consciousness, how is it going to impact their lives?
Yes.
How the things that they know now, because Prabhupada before he passed away, he said the second half of his mission was to introduce Varnashram system.
Yes.
So Varnashram system means social order.
Yes.
And social order means what are we doing? How are we going to present the element of justice? What does justice look like for us and that it would appeal to the rest of society?
Yes.
What about the element of education?
Yes.
What is education going to look like for us and have it appeal to the rest of society? So we have to take those into in the old days, nobody took what society thought into consideration. But now, if we really are serious about establishing Varnashram,
Yes.
we need to kind of include the rest of society and how to form a strategy. We need to have a real strategy as far as the movement goes and how to interject these universal principles into society.
Yeah.
What I call making Krishna consciousness relevant.
Yeah.
We all can do that in our own way to make Krishna consciousness relevant. So I don't want to take up too much of your time, Prabhu.
No, thank you,
I
Bruce.
really must thank you for inviting me to do this interview.
Thank you for
It's a
sharing.
pleasure.
Yeah, if I
And
think of any follow-up points, I'll be in touch, and maybe we'll talk again sometime.
it's a pleasure. And take care of yourself.
Thank you so much.
And thank you so much for your service
All right.
and for being in Mayapur. This is a major, major project. Thank you so very much. Hare
Hare
Krishna,
Krishna. Jai Shri Prabhupada. Hare Bol.
Hare Bolo.